Hey, you have Patrick Finoro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz and Visa Franchise. Excited to have on Johnny Franchise. That's what his friends in the franchising community call John Francis. He's worn a lot of different hats: franchisor multiple times, franchisee multiple times, on the board of directors, special advisor at numerous franchise brands. Johnny, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Man, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And you have a unique background, and it's actually a few guests I've had on have been born into franchising. Can you talk a little bit about how
Sure.
you were kind of predestined to be in and grow in this space?
Sure. My dad was a barber cutting hair here in Minnesota, where I live, in the 50s. He and my mother together started a business, a barber shop business. And my dad, again, long story short, got frustrated with the growth prospects that he saw in the industry at the time. So he did some innovation and created a kind of a new concept in the salon industry. In those days, it was a hair salon for men, hair styling for men. There were barbershops for men and there were beauty salons for women. He created kind of a new version of a barbershop that was high end, full service. They used products and blow dryers and things that barbers really didn't use. And so he innovated in the industry and it worked. He had a nice growth. He grew up multiple units and here in the Twin Cities, and he got to the point where he wasn't cutting hair anymore. He had 5 locations, and he was wildly successful. The managers in those 5 locations came to him and said, "Look, we see what's going on, and we want a piece of the action. We want a part of that. We want to be part of it." And he said, "Well, let me work on that. Let me find a
So it was
way."
like a friendly coup.
Kind of. I mean, they
Yeah.
were they were ambitious and they're smart, hardworking guys. And my dad was always a fair and reasonable guy, a good entrepreneur. So he said, "Let me find a way." And someone said, "Why don't you franchise it?" He said, "What's that?" Right? Because in those days, this would have been early '60s, right? There were hotels and gas stations and restaurants, but we're pretty sure he was the first one to franchise a barber shop. So those first 5 store managers who were barbers went out and became franchisees. He sent one to the north, one to the east, one to the west. They went around the region here and they set up. He said, "You do what I'm doing here. You build a salon and you follow our system. You use our names. You already know how to do the business." So he sent those 5 out to become franchisees, and it worked.
So then at that point, he had five corporate, five franchise
That's
locations.
right. That's right. And one thing led to another. And, again, long story short, I mean, they made all the classic entrepreneurial mistakes, but they
Yeah.
grew and they worked together. And my dad was a kind of an entrepreneurial leader, right? He could inspire people and paint the picture and then put them in it. And he did a lot of wonderful things for these early adopter, his friends, the franchisees. And they created a real way to, I would say, professionalize the barber business. Barbers were seen as barbers. That was it. He created a way for these barbers to become business owners and not just own the chair or own the barber shop. You could own multiples and you
Scale it.
could turn that into other investments. And so he created a new way of creating opportunity in the salon industry, and it worked. And so I grew up. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So growing up, I thought everybody had a franchise and everyone owned 2 or 3 businesses and everybody worked for themselves except the people that worked for us. So I grew up in a franchise company. That was our family business, was a
So you
franchise.
were working mid teens, early teens. You were already working.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, I'm the youngest of 5. My dad was a pretty wild entrepreneur. He got into a lot of stuff, right? He never saw a deal he didn't like, and
Okay.
he bought a lot of real estate, rental
Yeah.
properties, commercial, residential, multifamily. He got into other businesses and things that he was partners with and engaged with different things. And so as I was coming up through high school and college, I earned the reputation, I guess, the nickname of the cleanup kid. So I would come behind my dad and put structure to the chaos that he would often leave in place.
So
So
you
I
were
would
getting groomed to be like the COO.
it was a great environment, man. I worked really hard at a young age. I mean, everything from filling dumpsters and mowing lawns and painting warehouses to, property management, leasing, financing, asset acquisition, disposition, multiple businesses, all kinds of employees and partners. I learned to think like a business owner early on. And he was a great role model, a great example, and really just a great guy. He did a lot of things right. and he took care of the people around him. He was very well known, well respected. My mom and dad went on to build a very substantial franchisor. They actually took it public, and we were publicly traded franchisor in the 80s and 90s. We did international work and acquisition work, and I got to do all of those things through the
Did your
business.
siblings join as well?
My brother was involved early on in the marketing, and then he left and went and became a franchisee. So he owned salons. And then I have three sisters that, we all had opportunities to work in the business, but they never really got as involved as I did.
Okay.
My dad passed away in 1994, and he had cancer for a long time. And we knew that was coming. I mean, you can anticipate that. So my mom and my dad, they beefed up the board of directors for our company,
Smart.
and they brought in outside executives and presidents and vice presidents and really talented professionals in the different areas. And the company was prepared for him when he passed. My mom took over and doubled the size of the system in the next 5 years. It's fantastic, right? She was a great leader in her own right. She stepped up and held on to the steering wheel and stomped on the gas pedal, and the thing just kept going. And then my older brother died in a car accident just a couple years later, which was obviously unexpected and quite tragic. And it really was upset the apple cart, so to speak. My mother came out of that, kind of process of losing her oldest child, and she said, "I want to retire." And again, one thing led to another. We had a very capable board. The board set up a plan, and we took it out through the investment banks, and we wound up selling the whole company, which really wasn't the intention, but it turned out to be the outcome because we got a fantastic offer from a strategic buyer. The board basically said to me, "Get out of the way, kid. We're selling this company." And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. I've been working my whole life trying to move up and around in this organization." And they said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. Your family's going to be fine. Right? Get out of the way." So I got the opportunity to take our company apart and put it back together inside of the acquiring company, which was a fantastic experience. They were bigger than us, and they had all kinds of things they could do that we were only thinking about. But after about 9 months, when the smoke had cleared and everything was okay, I mean, it was a good deal, I left because I didn't feel like I was an owner anymore. It certainly didn't feel like my business anymore, my family's business anymore. So I took I had a pretty fantastic employment arrangement, so I took advantage of that and left.
How old were you at this time?
32.
Wow, impressive.
So I would say that was my first retirement, right? Which I didn't really retire, but it was a major change in my path. So I took a year and a half off, and then I kept going to the IFA conferences because I grew up going to IFA conferences with my mom and dad. It was like going to a wedding. You knew about half the people. My mom and dad are in the IFA Hall of Fame, right?
I saw that.
Together, which is fantastic, right? Not only what they did for the industry and the salons, but some of the things we did as a franchisor were very innovative and became common practice in franchising.
Well, you professionalize an industry that hadn't been professionalized before. And
Exactly.
You see other brands like European Wax did that for the waxing industry.
Yeah.
Other brands did that years back for fitness.
Yeah. So I went on and, I could do, I remember thinking I had 4 opportunities. I could stay in franchising, but I had to stay out of the hair salon business. Fine. I knew a lot about real estate. I knew a lot about retail real estate in particular, and I knew about service concepts, retail service. So I did my thing. I looked around, and I wound up getting involved with a brand called PostNet, which is like a business service center concept. And back in those days, there was Mailbox, etc., and PostNet, and that industry was still growing.
And Mailbox, etc., is now a UPS store, right?
Right. UPS bought Mailbox, etc., and then Kinko's was sold to FedEx, and of course that changed that industry. And but I had 10 years as a area developer, multi-unit franchisee. I did a lot of wonderful things with that brand. I had a great run. The PostNet people, the great culture, great leaders, great franchisees. I mean, we worked really hard and we had a lot of fun. Had some good success there. And along the way, I got involved in a few other brands as a partner, as an investor, as a consultant, advisor. I did 5 different franchise deals over the next 10 years. And Then when the recession in 2008 and 9, when that whole thing came and it stopped, the credit markets stopped. So I said to the Postnet fellas, I said, look, I could try to sell franchises. Nobody can get financing. It's no fun if I can't open any new stores. So I think I'm going to unwind. So I sold my units and I negotiated actually over breakfast at IFA. We negotiated a buyout of my regional developer contract. They hired me on
So
the spot.
were those transitioned into corporate units?
No, I had sold the units to other local franchisees here where I was
Okay.
in Minneapolis, and I had a royalty split in my regional developer contract. So we negotiated that, and they were fair to me, treated me fine, and my family got deeper invested in the commercial real estate at that time because that recession, everything was on sale. So we took advantage of that as a family office, but the Postnet brand asked me to come help them on the corporate side because I was still thinking like a franchisor because that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
So I did that for a couple of years and had some real fun working on their business on the franchisor side. And then I got involved in other brands as an advisor, as a board member, and just a few other opportunities. I guess I kept showing up. I say I keep showing up, and I keep finding places where I can help. Right? I don't. So for the last 10 years, I've been what I call a freestyle consultant, right? Or sort of a reluctant consultant is what I used to call myself. But what I don't use the word consultant today because consultant in franchising usually means I'm a matchmaker
Someone's
or
selling.
I'm a broker
Yeah.
or I'm selling somebody else's deal. So I use the word advisor or
Yeah.
coach.
That's what I would think. For me, like trusted advisor, strategic advisor is kind of what I would have said. Johnny does.
That's right. So I serve on a number of boards, franchisors, and one large franchisee. I do a little bit of speaking. I have an agent, and I do some occasional speaking. I really enjoy that, and I try to help where I can. Right? I try to people call, and I get around. I see a lot of stuff, and if I can help someone, I try. And if I can't, I get out of the way. And I say I'll only send an invoice if I think you deserve it. So I like to. I'm a lucky guy. I get to kind of do what I want, and I'm very selective on what I work with. And the newest thing I'm working on now is a mastermind group for franchisors. I'm actually a franchisee again of a brand called ZorForum, which does
Oh, cool.
masterminds for franchisors, which is exactly what I want to do. So I've been doing that now for about a year and a half, and still have some of the other boards and some coaching clients. And I have what I've learned is called a portfolio career, right? So I don't really want to own anything. I don't really want to run anything. I don't really want to sell anything. I just want to help other people with their franchise business, whether it's a franchisor that's looking to grow or fix or solve some important situation they're struggling with, or if it's a franchisee trying to get to that next level of performance. Right. I want to be an advocate to the franchise industry, and wherever that takes me, I guess, I kind of find my way.
Have your children asked you about franchising and opportunities in the space?
Oh, sure. I've got two daughters, and they're teenagers now. One's in college, and one's in high school. And I actually had them with me at the IFA in February, which was a lot of fun. I took my oldest daughter through the Women's Franchise Council Leadership Forum,
Very
which
cool.
was fantastic, right? We had a great time with that. I don't know if they'll get involved in franchising. I'm not really pushing them that way. I'm exposing them to it, and they've watched me do my work for the years, but I'm leaving it up to them. If they're interested, I'll bring them around and let them see and understand what's out there. But who knows? I'm optimistic they'll find something they love. As much as I love, they say if you love what you do, it's not work. I feel that way about the work that I do. I really do love what I do. Most of the times, it's very rewarding. There are a few times, like anything, it's frustrating and nothing's easy, but it's satisfying to see. I can see my fingerprints on these other brands. If I work with a brand or a founder, I say I help founders become CEOs, right? Because that's not always a natural transition. And I've
No.
worked with enough brands for long enough time where I can see the growth and the impact of my advice or my coaching or my, whatever it is that I do there, and see those brands really get to that next level. And it's a fantastic it's very rewarding to see them, all these brands continue, and I get compensated, but it's really not about that. I feel grateful to be able to help other people and help the
What,
industry get it right.
so, I can think of some success cases you've been associated with, and how we originally connected was through Doug Dwyer from Dreammaker Bath and Kitchen, and
Right.
it's incredible what you've done together with Doug, and I know how franchisees are kind of, there's different life cycles, and
Right.
talking to franchisees in their system, it seems like a lot of what you've kind of taught has rubbed off in that system, and the average unit volume shows, the numbers show. I'd love to learn a bit more about that franchisee life cycle and
Yeah.
how you work with clients, the
Sure.
franchisors implementing that, as well as prospective franchisees and current franchisees that are listening. This is really for you, and
Yeah.
it's
It's
really
true.
important to understand.
Well, when COVID came around, I have a speaker agent I mentioned, and she had me booked for some speaking opportunities. Of course, everything got canceled. Everything stopped. Everything, like, what do you mean? She's like, well, nobody's going anywhere, so everything's off. And I said, what am I supposed to do? She said, well, the other good speakers are making video. They're going online. She said, figure out how to use Zoom, create some program, turn your speech into a video. So I said, how do I do that? She said, you'll figure it out, right? So I did. So I had the time because nobody was going anywhere, and I created my keynote program is called the Franchise Lifecycle, and I created it into a video series, which I never would have done.
I've seen a few of the videos.
Yeah, and it's pretty straightforward stuff, but I think because it comes from my own personal experience, and I've been around enough brands and enough situations where I see the patterns and I see the similarities, and I can see what's coming for a lot of franchisors and for franchisees. So the basic premise is I say there's four phases to a life cycle of a franchisee. The first phase is your baby toddler, when you're brand new and you're just learning everything. It's the first 6 months or the first year or two or whatever. You're just a baby, and you got to learn how to walk and talk, and you need a lot of supervision, and you got to be very careful, and it's very intentional. Do these things, right? Phase one. And then phase two is the teenage phase, where you think you know everything, but you really don't know much. And that's a little dangerous and a risky period of life, and in growth as a franchisee when you really start going. And then the third phase is what I call the adult phase, where you kind of settle in, and now you've made it. Hopefully, you're having the success you expected, and you're working hard, and you're doing your part, and everything's good. Then the fourth phase is sort of optional. It's the legacy phase, or what I like to call the rock star phase. And this is where franchisees go to multiple units. They build for scale. They might get into multiple brands. It's a whole new dimension of opportunity, and that's not automatic. The first three phases you kind of age through. The fourth phase is entirely intentional. You have to really do some things. So what I talk about in my program is what success looks like and what failure looks like at each of those four phases, and what it feels like. Because I've seen it, I've lived it myself, I've done it several times, and I've seen hundreds of franchisees, if not thousands of franchisees that I've worked with over the
Let's
years.
talk about the failures, because one thing that makes me upset is in the franchise industry, there's a lot of like selling, be your own boss. Like, it's
Yeah,
awesome being an entrepreneur, but it's hard, as you know. There's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of failures people don't talk about. But
yeah,
I'd be curious to hear like a couple of examples of failures where they don't make that critical jump to the next stage.
yeah. There's usually two things that I think cause most franchisee failures. One is undercapitalization or a lack of understanding of the financial models, right? People spend too much and run out of money. And when you can't pay your bills or you can't pay yourself, you can't really sustain that forever, right? Things get really weird when you can't
I,
pay your
I,
bills.
I can really relate to that in talking to hundreds of franchisees where your head is not right, and you're going to be stingy about marketing expenses, and that's when you need to spend money on marketing the
Yeah,
most, and it
yeah.
can
It's the
become like
first
a
thing
death
that gets
death
cut is
spiral.
advertising because they think it's optional, and it's actually the opposite. It's fundamental. It has to. So that's usually where I see people get tripped up is they don't have a good understanding, or they're not properly capitalized, and they run out of money, and things go really weird fast. The second thing I see franchisees really struggle with is staff and employment and being an employer and being a leader and a motivator and handling, hiring, motivating, retaining, handling employees is hard. Even if they're good employees and you have a great business, but it's hard and it's changing all the time, and the regulations are changing, and some markets are much more difficult than others, and that complexity that any most every franchise has employees at some level, depending on the model. But I see people trip that up, and they don't get help, or they don't ask for help, and they struggle, and then their staff disappears, or worse, the bad ones stay, and they continue to struggle, and they don't know how to fix it, and pretty soon there goes back to the first problem, right? The revenues are down, their profits are gone, and it's unsustainable. So usually it's money or people, which is very oversimplifying things. But what I don't see a lot of is where the franchisor screws it up. I mean, that happens. Franchisors make mistakes, and they certainly are not perfect or flawless. There's always issues, but usually it's the franchisee who doesn't fully implement or execute the model, or doesn't get the help when they need it, or won't take the help when it's offered. And that's the most frustrating thing. I've done a fair amount of work with franchisees, well, and franchisors, where I'll come in and do my thing, and they think this is the problem, and we pull it back and we open it up and we find out what's really the problem. And then I'll give them 3 or 5 ways to solve that problem, but they choose to do nothing about it. And it's like, well, why am I here? And so they fail. And
Yeah.
I don't understand or tolerate much of that. I tend to move on pretty quickly. If I sense that's going to happen, I'm like, good luck to you. I wish you the best. I'll be here when you're done, if you want to talk later. But I like to work with people and brands that are willing and interested in getting it right. And they know that they don't have all the answers. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not a know-it-all. I'm a share-it-all, right? I'll
Yeah.
tell you what I think,
Experience.
and I'll give you ideas, and I'll leverage my network. I mean, I know a lot of people around, and can say, well, this guy had something similar, or this woman she's been there and done that. And, you can learn from each other. Right? Franchising, the beauty of franchising is everybody's in sort of the same business in one way or another, and we love to help each other get it right. And I grew up with that, and so that is something I do kind of naturally, is just try to facilitate those relationships and the understanding that comes with it.
I couldn't agree more on the people and financial side. And one thing I've seen more recently, I should say, is basically the franchisee didn't fully know what they were getting into.
Yeah.
And there might have been like an outside sales organization, like a franchise broker or franchise sales organization, where the franchisee thought they really could be semi-absentee
Yeah,
and
there's no such
not
thing.
really working much. And then they start the franchise and they realize, oh shoot, like this is going to be a lot of work. And then that's when I think a lot of issues start, where there just wasn't a clear communication of expectations, where maybe it's 20 hours a week some weeks, and maybe it's 80 hours a week some weeks, and you're going to have to commit to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of people come in thinking, well, I bought a franchise, so it's automatic. And that's not the case. You bought a franchise, so there's a system. Maybe there's some advantages, but it's certainly not automatic. You still
Well,
have to
that's like that's like the fourth stage, that it can be scaled up after 1, 2, 3. Then it's multi-unit.
If you're lucky and good, and there's no such thing as absentee business. If you want absentee business, buy a savings bond,
Stock,
there's nothing like
ETF,
it.
savings bond, whatever.
So anyway, I love seeing people get it right, and I love helping people who want the help or are ready for help. I'll do that, and if I can't help, I'll try to help, or point them in the right direction, or wish them the best. But it's a big world out there. Franchising's been around for a long time, and I'm amazed at just how big and big and big it keeps getting bigger. I remember when I was younger, I can't get any bigger. But sure enough, and now I'm obviously older, and I understand things differently. It's like this is going to keep going for a long time. I think it's a wonderful business model.
It's become like essentially a technology provider. It's like a shared service. where
Yeah.
you have the brand, but also it's like all these other services that are built into the brand. And yeah, you solve the people and finance item. Like the franchisor is handling branding, the franchisor is handling product development. They're doing like half the work. So you just have to focus on a few key
Yeah.
areas of the business to have success.
Yeah, and nothing's easy. It looks easy, it sounds easy, and when people are successful, they don't really talk about the hard parts, right? I think it's like someone told me it's like having children, right? If you remembered everything about having children, you'd never have another one. But of course, you remember the good parts, and you have kind of selective memory. You forget about the sleep deprivation, the infant, the things that can go wrong with the. So it's just, I think it's like that human nature. I think people want to believe it's easier than it is, but a lot of people do it. A lot of people are good at it, but it's not accidental or automatic. That's for sure.
I'm sure you get asked all the time, like what franchise you would invest in.
Mhm.
Are there any interesting franchise concepts or industries that prospective franchisees should think about in 2023?
I don't have an answer for that. There's so much out there.
Yeah,
Um, what I see is a lot of emerging brands. I get calls from a lot of folks that are early stage. They've got 1 or 2 units and they're just trying to grow. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of people franchise their business before they're really prepared. Uh, Kind of like the other situation, franchisees struggle, franchisors struggle too. And I think some people think it's a lot easier than it is, right? They don't understand the commitment and the time and the money and the focus. And now you're out of the business you came from. Now you're franchising that business. That's another
totally
business
different type of business.
and different skills and different everything. So a lot of this emerging brands I talk to, I mean, I really try to be honest and realistic and give them an honest assessment of what I think they're capable of. And if they're willing to do all those things, keep going, man. Good luck. And if not, here's 5 ways to get out of the deal. And when people say, "Well, what brand should I buy? What should I look at?" And this is going to sound maybe awful, but I think it's true. I say the first 50 units in a brand are experimental,
Yeah.
right? Until a brand has more than 50 units, they're still making a lot of changes. They're still figuring out their supply chains, their technologies, the marketing, the
The
financials,
square footage. I talked
all
to
of it
a franchisor that like
changes.
they're like almost 200 units and they're still playing around with the square footage.
So I think a good brand is, when they're well established, they've been around for 10 years, they've got maybe 100 or 200 units, and there's still plenty of white space on the map. But you can now it's stable and the resale is much more likely with an established brand, and not necessarily just a mature brand or even a national brand, but when the experimentation has slowed to just innovation, not
Yeah.
experimentation.
We study a lot the resale values at Vetted Biz, and that's where
Yeah,
you see the multiples change. Like
for
where
sure.
random independent business might be 3 times what the owner's making, like whether it's salary, dividends, health insurance benefits, but like a Dunkin' Donuts might be 6x. Like there are certain franchise brands that really yield like a much higher resale value. But yeah, as an emerging brand, unless it's like Crumble Cookies, you're not going to get some crazy resale value, some crazy multiple.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not easy selling successfully. I've done it. I've had my share of wins. I've had my share of losses. I tell people I've opened stores, closed stores, merged stores, converted stores, moved stores. I've filled dumpsters with equipment. Right, I know how that feels, and it's awful. But there's a point where you got to accept that, right? And I say it's not a failure if you learned a lesson, right? You learn something, you keep going, you plow through, you figure out what did I learn, what am I never going to do again, and you keep going if you have the ability. So it's but you know what? I love franchising when it's done well. When everyone does what they're supposed to do, the franchisor, the franchisee, and the suppliers. When everybody plays their role and executes well, man, everybody wins. And it's the most powerful business model I've ever experienced, where you can really create great success for everybody involved.
And what do you think in terms of prospective franchisees starting a franchise from zero or exploring the resales in their area?
Well, I think resales are a good opportunity. it should certainly be investigated. There are specialists out there that work with just resales, and they're not all the same. I've got
Yeah.
some good friends that work in that niche. But I think resales are worth investigating. But you got to understand, why is it for sale and what does it really need? Sometimes it's hard to determine what's necessary to turn that unit over, or to take it from where it is to where it needs to be. The difference with a startup brand new unit is you're in charge, you control everything. So
You
you're
set the
not,
culture with the people too.
you set the pace, and but resales can be very attractive if you can find a good opportunity, good brand, and a good market that for whatever reason didn't work for the previous owner, but you can figure out what's the solution to make this successful. It can be a great way to get into a brand, and it can be a great way to expand inside of a brand. You take out the other franchisees that are ready to sell. If you're a successful, motivated franchisee, you can consolidate a lot of units inside of a brand. That's a great opportunity for the right situation. Not always, but so I think there's a lot of opportunities around that resale, either whether it's your first unit or whether it's your 10th unit. I see it in some of the brands I work with. They're old and mature, and there's a lot of consolidation where you see guys trading franchises like baseball cards. Like, okay, I'll give you these two, but I want this four, and here's $100. Like they're making deals, over lunch, and at the end of the lunch, well, this guy had 10, but this guy now has 20, and I mean that's wonderful, right? And they can run those businesses and make those decisions pretty quickly. It's unusual, but I've seen it, and it's kind of a lot of fun.
How do like the most successful franchise brands deal with like how they make money? Because you have one like simple way that the franchisor makes money with like off the royalty,
Mm-hmm.
so percentage of sales usually,
Right.
and then you have potential for them to get kickbacks from the suppliers or different fees that they bake in with technology fees. What
Yeah.
have you seen like being the most successful in terms of like this is how the franchisors makes money and it's worked for a while over
Yeah.
the long run?
Well, we never use the word kickbacks, right? That's not nobody likes to hear that. I use the term rebates, right? Or
Rebates.
so whatever. Franchisors, I think they have to be focused on the franchisee's success first. If the franchisor is focused on how do they get more money out of these franchisees, if they're nickel and diming their franchisees, that they don't, nobody likes that. Franchisees don't like that, and they'll sense that. And you've probably seen other brands self-destruct because
Yeah.
they lose sight that the franchisor gets greedy, and they forget that the franchisee needs to win first. So if the franchisee is winning and expanding, and when they're making money, they're generally pretty happy. A lot of the problems go away. If they're not making money, or they're not feeling the respect and the support from franchisor, then everything's a problem. So I think the first thing is the franchisor needs to focus on unit level economics and
Yeah.
the happiness of their franchisees, and getting the right people in that brand. So they make it on the franchise fees as they're growing up, and then they make it on the royalties. And if they're good, they get to that self-sufficiency pretty quickly if they can manage their overhead, which is another challenge. But the incidental fees, the ad fund and the tech fund and the recruiting fund, and the different kind of fees, and really that goes to help provide the resources to the franchisor so they can provide the support to the franchisees. So it's got to be like that. I think the other piece that I think some franchisors get really good at is running corporate stores.
Yeah.
Not always, but in a lot of cases, but the corporate stores can generate a lot of profit, and they're in the business. They're in that business just like the franchisees are in the business. They're dealing with the same day-to-day operational issues. I think sometimes that's a really good strategy, but you got to have the capacity to run franchise business and corporate units. But those corporate units can throw off a lot of great profit
Well,
and
I've
cash flow.
seen like your father's example where there's like five, six, seven corporate locations, and that funds the launch of a franchise program.
Exactly. Exactly right.
And that 500K 700K of income is it gives time to then start making money on the royalties and other fees down the line, and
Yeah.
not just selling franchises to
It
get that
allows the
franchise fee.
franchisor to make better decisions about
Yeah.
franchisees. They're not desperate. You
Exactly.
can tell if you're talking to a franchisor who is trying real hard to sell to anybody because they need that money to make payroll, and that's real. I mean, that happens, and it's awful because those franchisors who allow that, I guess, or do that, are creating bigger problems for themselves later on, and that's a real problem. But sometimes, if you've got enough corporate units or the core business is big enough, it allows you to take your time and be more selective and probably do a better job as a franchisor because you're still running the business. But it's pretty uncommon, I think, these days. It seems to me to be most of the emerging brands I'm talking to, they might have the original unit, but they're really focused on just selling and selling and opening. And I'm like, hold on, be
Maybe
careful
that's
what you
part of
wish
like
for.
the current market where there's so much like private equity money compared to when your dad IPO'd,
Yeah,
which was a much more common path
yeah,
for restaurants and even franchise brands back in the day to access capital and take it to the next level. Where now, they could be a full buyout or get a huge investment in at like a really big multiple,
yeah.
but that private equity fund's going to want to see, a certain size and unit count before
Yeah,
they
usually. I've seen private equity do some wonderful things, and I've seen private equity destroy a brand. So it's not always the best thing. What I wrote an article and I had a kind of an epiphany. I was at a conference last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, 21, when COVID was coming out and people are coming out again. And I sat through some conference. It doesn't matter which one, but I was talking to a lot of franchisors early stage, and all they wanted to do was get it big enough so they could sell to private equity.
wow.
And I said, why? What's the point? Right?
Yeah.
These are nice businesses. You get a nice franchise business, you run it up. Why not play the long game and own that business for 10, 20, 30 years? Right? Why do you have to crank it up just to sell it and try and do it again? I think there's a lot of greed and ego that drives those decisions. And I think that's a terrible thing. Those are bad basis to make decisions on greed and ego. And so when I see that, and I see it, and I call it out, and I kind of avoid those situations personally. I think that's a wrong motivation to be a franchisor or a franchisee. I want people to
Especially if
do
you, as the founder, are selling someone to sign a 10-year contract, but knowingly you want to get out in 6 months, 18 months,
yeah,
and it's going to be someone else they're working with.
yeah. It's so I don't like that when I see it's not all the time, but I see it enough that it bothers me, I guess. And I think there will be a shift of mentality where private equity is not the only way. When it's done well, private equity is very powerful and very wonderful and really has great impact. I've seen that. I've lived through that. I know what that feels like. But I've also seen it done for the wrong reasons and at the wrong time, and that's when it fails. And
And
who
I've
gets
seen,
hurt? The franchisees get hurt, which is what really bothers me because they didn't do anything wrong, right? It's not like they had a say in the deal, right? And but they got to live with the outcome. It's risky, it's dangerous, and but I guess that's life. Maybe I don't know. So I like to see that it's changed the industry. I think it's actually improved the professionalism. The private equity has, those are smart people and they bring a lot of talent and horsepower and
definitely.
help improve the performance of those organizations usually. So I like that, but it's got to be balanced with the motivation as well. Because if it's all about money, it's not going to last.
And I guess, well, the people that are all about money, it won't be as much of an issue. But I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs that sell the business and then they have a really tough time, even depression, after selling,
Yeah.
a business that they grew from the ground up, and there's then no purpose right away, and they have issues.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a different situation. That I think comes through your who are you and what are you really trying to do? You know, that's why I don't know. I grew up with our family. We held that business for 36 years. It was
Wow, that's
older than
incredible.
me, right? I mean, which is wonderful, long time. And we had a lot of fun with it. We had a lot of success with it. We created a lot of successful franchisees and their staffs, and a lot of suppliers that grew up with us
Yeah.
and created a lot of success. That to me, that's I guess more what I think is kind of the best outcome. Not the only
Job
outcome.
creation and livelihoods. I mean, probably like, I don't know, 10,000 plus people, like the franchisees, their staff, the suppliers.
Oh yeah, yeah. We had I did a kind of an analysis of how many people were impacted by our brand. It was over 15,000 people at
Oh,
the time,
wow. Okay. So
and
that
that
wasn't
was
so off. Like you could fill a small town with everyone.
that's a lot of people, And so the decisions you make have a ripple effect, and I think some people are aware of that and take that very seriously. That's a responsibility, an opportunity to kind of steward the brand and the business and make decisions for the long term. But I think a lot of people just don't understand that, and they're just looking to turn it and turn it and turn it, and somewhere in between is probably appropriate.
That's fair. Johnny, any closing thoughts for prospective franchisees starting their entrepreneurial journey?
The best advice for a prospective franchisee is take your time if you can. Please don't be in a hurry. Do your homework, do the validation, go spend time with franchisees in that brand. If you find a brand you like and you've looked at the category, you look at the competitors, and you figure out why this is the one for you, go spend time with the other franchisees because they are where you're going. They're already there. And if they're not happy, if you don't identify with them, if they're not your people, that's a wrong brand. Might not be the wrong business, might be just the wrong brand in that category. So do your homework, take the time, really know everything you can before you commit to it. And then make sure you've got enough money and you've got enough ability to execute that franchise. Because nothing's easy. And the franchisor will do their part, hopefully, right? But you got to do your part as an operator, owner, franchise owner. And that means owner. That means think like an owner. You don't just work there, you're responsible for the outcome, good or bad. And
Yeah, I love that. Take ownership, and it falls on the franchisee to do their due diligence and make sure that franchisees are making money, that they could see themselves
Mhm.
in their shoes, and it's an opportunity that they're comfortable with.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into making those choices. And I think a lot of people, I use the joke, I said, I know people who spend more time planning their vacation than they did buying a franchise. Like, really, it's a much bigger commitment than a vacation. So it
Oh
should
yeah.
take the appropriate amount of time and energy to really understand what you're getting involved with and what's it going to take for you to be successful in that business.
Well, Johnny, it was awesome having you on. Thanks for opening
Thank
up
you.
about your experience, your client's experience, family experience. It's been helpful for me. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners as well.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the chance to share what I can and try to, tell some stories, I guess, share some perspective. And I think franchising is, really the opportunities are tremendous. They're all over the place. And maybe that's part of the problem is there's so many different ways to go and so many different things you can do with the franchise industry. But I think if you're, a lot of common sense, I think is important to keep. And hard work and high integrity. Make decisions for the right reasons. And generally speaking, I think it's a pretty safe place to go if you know what you're doing. But I don't know. That sounds kind of cliche, but I think it's true. So thank
Yeah,
you.
no,
Glad to be
there's a
here and
reason that it's cliche. Like
glad to
it's
be a resource. I'm happy to help where I can.
Johnny, really appreciate it again, and thanks again for everything you've shared.